Welcome back. You're at Bio 211. This is Anatomy and Physiology 1. This is Chapter 1, and we're about to entertain basic anatomical terminology. I am not going to go into all of the nuances of basic anatomical terminology here. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply say, oh, look, you need to be able to describe to other human beings on the face of the planet what you're looking at. And it doesn't matter what you think. There's a set of rules where a patient has a specific anatomical position, and however they change that, you have to accommodate for that. But basic anatomical position is the patient standing straight up. Their arms are at their sides, their thumbs are turned outward, their feet are flat on the floor, and their chin is on the horizon as well. Once you get that, what you can do is you can add on what do you actually see, and that's what we talk about. Body positions. There's the correct anatomical position, which is what I just told to you, but you'll notice at any given point on any given cartoon now, regardless male, female, makes no difference. Missing a leg, not missing a leg, missing an arm, not missing an arm. You can put in now where exactly what you see so somebody else knows what you saw. Should it change? Normally the body is upright, but terms for a reclining body, a prone position is the body is the laying face down. That's important because you got to figure out if you walk into a room and you say, hey, I found the patient prone, everybody knows what you mean then. If you found them supine, it means you find them lying face up. Okay? So this is the part where you actually have to start letting go of the vocabulary you would normally use, and you have to start using the vocabulary that everybody else around you will expect you to know. Some of the basic stuff, the skull, the neck, the chest, the trunk, limbs, stuff like that, we're going to cover that inside lab, and you will have to learn most. I can't say you have to learn all of it. There's a set of structures we absolutely positively make sure you learn before you leave this class. You have to perform at a specific level. Directional terms are more important though. So, because a lot of people, when you try to give somebody directions to begin with, can you get to the other side of town? Imagine doing that for intubation of a patient. You don't know what you're talking about. So, something that's moving to the anterior is moving towards the front. If it's moving towards the posterior, it's moving towards the back. And that is on a human in the correct anatomical position. That intubation I was just talking about a moment ago. The esophagus is posterior to the trachea, but when you're intubating a patient, the tool needs to go into the trachea. If you don't know that there's an esophagus behind the trachea and you stick it inside there, you're going to fill their stomach full of air, okay, and not their lungs. The knee is superior to the ankle. It doesn't mean your knee is better than your ankle. It means your knee is above the ankle, meaning moving towards the skull. Okay. We have a table for directional terms. I suggest you make flashcards. You're going to go through each one of these things, and we use them all semester long. Hell, you use them in AMP2. You're going to use them for the rest of your life. Okay. Generally speaking, if something is, as I said a moment ago, anterior, it's nearer to the front of the body, but that's relative. Notice they're using nearer here. It doesn't have to be at the front of the body, which is the way people see these things. It's not the way it works. Here's where students get lost. Something that is proximal means that it's closer to the site of origin. If you don't know what that means, if you think about an arm, the humerus articulates here with the clavicle and the scapula, right? So here are the bones. That would be its origin. So the more proximal you are, the more close you are to the trunk of the body. Once you get one, you can figure the rest of them out. But which is more distal? Is the humerus more distal or is the radius more distal? Well, the radius is more distal because it's farther away from the point of origin of the trunk of the body in correct anatomical position. Okay? If you're moving laterally, regardless of the side, if you're moving laterally, you're moving away from the midline. If you're moving medially, you're moving towards the midline. Okay? Because of that, you can actually create a series of imaginary planes. A sagittal plane divides the body into vertical portions, so those that are moving up and down. A mid-sagittal plane divides it equally in half, so the perfect straight line between the body. Parasagittal into unequal right and left sides. And that could be on either side. You do understand that, right? It doesn't have to be right parasagittal all the time. It could be left. Okay? And I said right because it's the patient's right where you see that parasagittal plane there. You can also throw in an oblique plane here where you have a mixture of the sagittal and transverse planes. Now when we cut a frontal plane, do they actually have one on here? They have one? They do. They have a frontal plane, right, where you actually end up with an anterior surface here. And if we remove this directly behind the posterior surface of the resulting pieces, it's actually hard to sort of describe to you, but you have to figure out a way to see this. I may have an imaginary line. I'm cutting through here. Now I have two pieces, right? The front piece has an anterior portion and a posterior portion, even though it is the anterior surface of the body. Likewise, that now anterior surface here is still toward the front or anterior portion of the remaining posterior portion. Think about that a little bit. It's kind of hard to describe to people. So when you're looking at imaging studies, somebody does an MRI or something like that, you actually have to figure out where you are in the body, and that's the sort of mental gymnastics you actually have to do. That oblique plane, I said, was a mixture of transverse and sagittal or transverse and frontal planes. And because we can do this anywhere inside the body now, we actually call these sections, and you sum those sections together to figure out what you're actually looking at. When you start looking inside of the body, you have these things that are open spaces, and Mother Nature abhors an open space. She has to fill something inside of that space. And you have things such as the cranial, thoracic, and abdominal pelvic cavities. You have much more than that, okay? But here's a simple way to look at this, and it's incomplete. You know, it's incomplete. That vertebral canal and that cranial cavity, you put those two things together, and that becomes the dorsal cavity, okay? All of these structures, thoracic, okay, abdominal pelvic, all of these are the anterior portion of the body. Okay, so if this is dorsal, then this makes this ventral. Okay, so the ventral cavity is made up of all of these. Now, I'm not quite sure why they don't teach that to you immediately, but you want to think of these as nested structures. Okay? Each of the cavities has stuff inside of it. The stuff that tends to freak people out is like, what's the difference between the pleural and the pericardial cavity? Well, these are spaces, and these spaces hold specific structures. If the thoracic cavity has both the pleural and the pericardial cavities as well as the mediastinum, it means the pleural cavity surrounds the lungs. Pericardial cavity surrounds the heart. Mediastinum is an area. It's not actually even a cavity, right? It's an area that actually has bits and pieces of other things. The abdominal pelvic cavity has the abdominal portion, which is the stomach, spleen, liver, gallbladder. You can read that yourself, okay? As well as the pelvic cavity. And depending on the male or the female, the organs of reproduction, like they say here, are internal. So all you're looking at there are glands for males. For females, you actually have a different set of glands as well as gestational tools. Okay. Where are some other cavities inside of your body? Let's get out of the cartoon here. Let's finish this up. There are some other cavities. Obviously, inside lab, I'm going to make you guys look at all of these things, right? Where you actually look at the oral, nasal, orbital, middle ear cavities, synovial cavities inside of your body, okay? As well as, let's go back here first. So if you're thinking about these, you're also thinking about what's occupying them, whatever's occupying them. And we'd say here, tongue and teeth. Well, is it always just tongue and teeth? You know, you put food in there, right? Those teeth do something, and that tongue does something. Nasal cavity, they say it's a nose, but it's actually made up of unique structures that have two functions. One is to make sure that the air you're inhaling is the appropriate temperature, and it has the appropriate amount of humidity inside of it. And that's the way I want you to start thinking of this. In our last couple of minutes here, we want to look at the regions inside of the body, right? And I want to first take a look at the harder way of looking at the body. And this is, again, a patient in correct anatomical position. And you can see here the clavicle bones. If you don't know where those are, just take your hands right and left, find your neck, and move out to the side and draw on top of your chest, and you'll find them. And you have these what are called mid-clavicular lines. You draw one down the left side, you draw one down the right side. you find these two subcostal. One is subcostal in the sense that it is literally below the ribs. And then you have this thing that's called the transtubercular line. Don't worry about it. Just notice that you now have 9 resulting spaces. Right hypochondriac, epigastric, left hypochondriac. Then you have right lumbar, umbilical region, left lumbar. Right inguinal, hypogastric, also called the pubic region, as well as the left inguinal, also called the iliac on both sides. All of these are correct answers, by the way. You can use, pubic versus hypogastric. We'll know what you're talking about. And it creates this tic-tac-toe grid. And your job is to realize that this line ends at the diaphragm. So I'm drawing in the diaphragm there. And you need to know what's inside every single one of these regions. Some of them are going to share. The liver comes way the F over here. So you're going to say the liver makes up blah, blah, and blah. And you have to pay attention because not everybody's liver is as big as other people's livers, right? So you want to know generally speaking. To make it easier, this is of course more specific. You get more precise information using regions. Quadrants. Let's get out of the cartoon part here. Quadrants here. You can see we can break it up into, we don't need to use those mid-clavicular and or subcostal lines, but you still have to put in the diaphragm, and you're still defining what's inside each quadrant. Okay, so this cartoon has the liver inside just the right and left upper quadrants, but when you look inside your textbook, that might not be the case. Likewise, you can see that the large intestine is in the right upper and lower, left upper and lower quadrants. Okay, you see how we use this now? So you have to be precise. So even though this is a good, quick way to do things, somebody presents inside the hospital with 2 gunshot wounds, you put right and lower quadrant, people are going to know exactly where to look. But if it's a shotgun blast to the abdominal pelvic region, telling somebody all quadrants affected may help them a little bit, but it's definitely not going to be precise enough. Okay. Just one more idea, and that is, well, these are what we see on the outside. How do we actually see things on the inside? And there's a series of techniques, the most basic of which, of course, is going to be radiography, where I'm assuming everybody inside the room has had one form of a X-ray at some point in time in their life. And what I want you to do is I want you to take a look at this, right? And you're like, I know how X-rays work. Well, do you understand how X-rays work? X-rays produce images of interior structures. Well, yes and no, they don't. What they do is they produce the structures of things where the X-rays were impeded or not impeded. So where does the film get exposed and where does the film not get exposed? Okay? Does that make sense? It does not pass easily through things like bone. So if this is a piece of film, it means the X-rays passed easily through your lungs, but got impeded at the bone. And therefore, because you're exposing film, all the dark spots were the spots that got exposed. And that's what we're trying to teach you here. And what I mean by that is you want to be able to look at some piece of information and say to yourself, okay, do I understand what I'm looking at here? And if so, how would I prove it? Okay, so that's the end of chapter 1. And obviously, you're going to read it, hopefully, before I see you. And then you're going to watch these things. But if you don't, that's okay too. These things are designed to help people think about stuff. If you're reading the book, you're thinking, I'm hoping. And then at the end of the day, you're going to want to participate inside class. Okay. So thank you for your attention, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.